Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is where senior leaders, as you know, come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I am joined by my friend, my favorite optimist, and our co-host, Scott Morris. He's the founder of Propulsion AI, a former CHRO, and he has all of the battle scars to prove it. So, Scott, every CHRO thinks that they are ready for the board meeting until somebody asks a question that they didn't prepare for.
You mean the question that starts with, so what's the quality of your leadership bench? Really?
Exactly. And the silence that follows could fill an entire conference room, usually right before someone pretends to check the appendix, because I'm sure that there's a slide in there someplace. But boards have gotten sharper. Since the SEC human capital disclosure rules hit, directors are asking questions that sound more like investors than HR reviewers. And that's a good thing. But here's the truth. Most of us are falling short. And if you're not in a publicly traded company, you're probably not ready for those kind of conversations. So we're going to be helping you so that you don't bring pages of data, but instead bring a story that moves capital.
It's going to be a good episode. But before we dive in, Jackson, let me ask, please subscribe to the podcast or leave us a comment or drop us a quick review on your preferred platform. It's how we grow the pod, and it's how we keep the content sharp for senior leaders. And a quick shout out to our sponsor, Dripify, the smarter way to build authentic professional relationships at scale. Both Jackson and I use Dripify. And whether you're a CHRO networking for insight or a founder building your brand, Dripify helps you reach the right people with the right message. You can check them out in there's a link that we're going to put into the show notes, or you can go to try.dripify.com/talent Sherpa.
So, Scott, let's start with reality. Over the last few years, boards have evolved faster than most HR teams realize. Between the SEC's human capital disclosure rules, ESG fatigue, and investor pressure for performance-linked talent metrics, directors are no longer satisfied with glossy engagement slides or turnover trends. What they want is clarity on whether human capital is an asset or a liability on the balance sheet. The National Association of Corporate Directors reported that this year, 74% of boards now demand quantitative workforce data tied to strategic risk. And if that's not enough, here's the kicker. Fewer than 30% of CHROs say that they feel confident in presenting that data in the language of capital allocation.
Well, and I think the gap isn't because CHROs lack the intelligence, but it's because the reporting hasn't caught up to the questions. Directors aren't asking for more dashboards, and we're really good at producing those. They are asking for judgment. They want to know our best people in our most critical roles. And we talk about that a lot on the pod. Do we have the leadership capacity to execute the plan the CEO is promising Wall Street?
That's exactly right. And I was in a boardroom, I won't say when, but the CHRO presented 20 slides on engagement scores and internal mobility. And the CFO followed with like 3 slides, one linking attrition in sales leadership to about a $62 million revenue miss. Guess which of those 2 conversations drove the next 40 minutes of discussion? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't the CHRO one.
Right. Well, it reminds me of a concept that you introduced me to, which is Jeff Smart's power score. And he framed, if I'm thinking back to what you and I have talked about, he frames performance as P times W times R, which is priorities, that's the P, who, which is the W, and relationships, which is the R. And that model holds up. Boards want to know if the organization is clear on the priorities that have been set, if we have the right people in the right roles, and if leadership is aligned to deliver through friction-free relationships. And what I really like about it when you shared it with me is it is deceptively simple. And I think that's why it works.
I think so too. The simplicity is, in fact, the genius. And the only way it doesn't work, Scott, is if you don't believe that priorities, people, or the relationships of how you get done aren't the things that drive outcomes. If you believe that, which I would imagine if you didn't, you wouldn't be listening to the podcast. If you believe that, like it drives everything forward at a much more accelerated pace. Most human capital reports, they die in complexity. The best ones sound like investors wrote them. And that's why I think this model works. And they answer three questions. Are we focused on the right things? Do we have the right talent density to win? And can this leadership team actually work together to execute them without burning time and trust? So let's maybe dive in and talk a little bit about some of the assumptions that human capital leaders have when trying to answer the question, are we aligned on what actually drives value? And I think one of the faulty assumptions is that boards care about all metrics equally. What do you think?
No, because of all of, there are certain things, if you 80-20 it, right, the 20 is frequently driving the boat.
Yeah, they care, I think, about cash. They care about risk. They care about, you know, narrative and enterprise priorities. They don't actually care about HR programs. I have bad news for all of us who they like. You're a business leader in this role. You're not a functional leader. And if you go in there and you are like many people are, and that is, I'm a set of HR programs looking for a problem to solve, like that, you're going to miss it. So if the CEO says, I don't know, the mission is margin expansion, your story has to show how the workforce leverage creates, that mission.
Here's another one, Jackson, and this is a big subject that I know you talk and write about a lot. Do we truly know our talent density, or are we just comforting ourselves with averages? And the faulty assumption there is that engagement or bench strength scores are going to equal readiness. But the reality is that talent density is frequently uneven, and I think boards can feel that before they see it. So the smart CHRO is going to show where the top quartile talent sits relative to its outsized impact. We did an episode on identifying key roles and A players, and same concept. The best CHROs quantify talent concentration, not just employee satisfaction.
Yeah, let's go back to the question you were asking. Do we truly know our talent density? And unfortunately, I think the answer for most people is no. I've recently been in the market looking for potential new opportunities after my last company blew up, and I talk all the time about talent density, and these are really good, sophisticated organizations. If you don't kind of hit that threshold, I'm not really talking to you. Most of them have never had the conversation about talent density. So if you believe that, then you should also believe that they're not measuring that, and that's not a board level directive. So I think you're absolutely right on the challenge. But if you go back, and whether it's Josh Breslin or if you go all the way back to the folks back at Netflix, what they will tell you over and over and over is talent density is the proactive and predictive human capital metric. And it also then allows you, and forgive me for going on my TED Talk on this for the 94th time, it allows you to be very, very focused on the roles that matter and getting those right rather than everything else. We've covered that on multiple pods, where we can't treat everyone the same and have an outsized impact. We've got to be really, really, really focused. So I guess, Scott, I'd love your thoughts on this. Do we actually think that we are leading through clarity, or are we just kind of contributing to the noise?
Well, you and I did a pod on, you're not the chief happiness officer. I think that was.
You're not the head of harmony.
You're not the head of harmony. That's it. Well, the faulty assumption here is relationship harmony is going to equal alignment, and it doesn't. But the reality is that a lot of us, leadership friction hides under the label of collaboration sometimes.
I agree. And that's why I come back to power score logic. When priorities drift, relationships degrade and execution slows. And so if you can focus it on power score as, do I have the right people? And let me just take a step back and talk about how I use it really, really quickly. I will work with brand new teams, whether I'm inside or in my consulting practice, and I will ask them top to bottom, how confident are you that everyone in your organization knows and what their priorities are, defined as outcomes, and you get a number. And then I ask the same question, top to bottom: how confident are you that you have the talent needed to deliver against those? And then on the relationships, how confident are you, on 1 to 10, that you have the relationships needed to execute what needs to get done? And you multiply those three numbers together, 10 times 10 times 10, that's 1,000, isn't it? I think. And did I do that math right?
Yeah, you did it right.
Like, there's nothing worse than being on a podcast and realizing I can't do simple math when we can't.
Never do math in public.
I'm really good at math, but for this reason, I had a momentary fit of insecurity. So forgive me for that. But if it's 10 times 10 times 10, then you are in a it's 1,000. If you are 9 times 9 times 9, you're like at 681 or something like that. And if you are what most companies are, which is like 5 times 5 times 5, then you're at 125, and you're at 125 over 1,000. That says I'm operating at roughly 12.5% efficiency in the things that drive performance. And what it allows you to do is be really focused in on how well you're setting expectations for the organization, how well you are driving talent through the organization, and how well you are building a culture that allows you to get stuff done in a friction-free way. It's like the simplicity is so good. And it kind of leads me to something I think, Scott, you and I were talking in the lead up to this pod that really struck me as genius, which, as you know, doesn't always happen when we're talking. But you said that boards are not afraid of bad news. They're afraid of vague news. So kind of let that sink in, right? The goal isn't to comfort the board. The goal is not to help support the CEO, no matter what they do. It is to help everyone in that environment to understand with absolute clarity where human capital is.
Yeah. And the problem with vague news is you can't do anything with it, right? You can do something with bad news. You can't do anything with vague news. So here's a question then, Jackson. How do we start to shift away from reporting activity to reporting human capital performance?
Yeah, I think step one is you have to start thinking about talent like a portfolio, not a population. So let me say that in more depth. You have to figure out who are your top players and make sure they are in your top roles. That is a part of the talent density process. When you do that, you will necessarily identify folks that are not in the right spot. And then you figure out how to reallocate them where they can be an A player for the roles as otherwise defined. And this isn't just, some bald guy on a podcast talking about this. McKinsey did some research in 2025. They show that companies that regularly reallocate top talent to new priorities outperform their peers by 2.4 times in total shareholder return. Like, that is a very powerful set of numbers. And yet most companies, and including, like, I'm the reformed smoker of this, right? I always thought about succession planning as the most important thing we did, but that was about filling holes when they open up. It wasn't about reallocating talent to put them in the right spot to over index on performance.
Well, you asked a question a second ago about, do boards care about all metrics equally? What if talent density became our leading indicator of execution speed?
I think it really is, because in a downturn, think about it this way: companies that protect density recover faster. And it's not about protecting all headcount, because there are heads inside your organization that matter more and less. And so I've unfortunately been in a position where we have needed to either grow rapidly or kind of unscale rapidly. That's my new politically correct term for going through massive restructuring. And in both of those cases, we identified the roles that mattered most for the chapter that we were going to go in, and we developed all of our talent actions against protecting that top quartile talent. And when we did that, we were able to create stability in those roles, which allowed us to do everything else. Had those roles not been maintained in a stable way, like then you're just like going from one fire to the next, trying to do your best. And what that really turns into is you are in fact a part-time arsonist as you're trying to put out fires, because you didn't do the upfront work to really lock people in that were necessary. The key input to that, Scott, is like you got to be very, very clear as to what jobs matter more than others. And that is uncomfortable for a lot of CHROs. It is not uncomfortable for really high performing ones.
I think it's uncomfortable beyond just the CHRO. You know, a lot of us, I think, would resist doing that. What if, Jackson, let's talk about that third variable in the power score. What if relationship friction was tracked like any other operating drag?
Yeah, it's hard to do, but you sure see it in alignment. And when it takes longer to get stuff done, either because you don't have the trust in the organization that allows you to get things done in a friction-free way, you do see it show up on the P&L. It shows up in cost. It shows up in delayed execution, and it ultimately will end up in margin, show up in margin. The smartest CHROs that I work with, they use kind of an organizational network analysis or pulse diagnostics to identify where collaboration slows decision speed. And so think about it in this way. At what point in an organization's engagement do we actually think about relationship friction? Well, we talk about collaboration a lot. We measure kind of cultural engagement level, but ultimately those are just really bad metrics to try to get at the organizational trust level. And it's that organizational trust that's the unlock, at least in my experience, to identify where those relationships either speed execution or drag it. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that in your worlds.
Well, I mean, so here's what I haven't done that I know you have done successfully, which is I have not tracked that score, which is kind of why I was asking the question, because qualitative measures and quantitative measures are different, and I've never found a successful way to confidently put a number against it. And so I'm curious, when you say pulse diagnostic, what have you used?
So I like the Gallup Q12. That helps me understand clarity. And I think clarity around what is expected of me at work, which, as we've talked before, is not only am I aligned with my manager, but am I aligned up and downstream from whatever workflows I'm a part of. The stronger that number is, I think it leads to a higher trust level, and that higher trust level allows friction-free relationships. It's not a direct link. I'm not sure if it's even the best. I've done that. I'm curious if there's anyone in the listening audience that has cracked this code. We'd love to actually have you come on the pod and talk about it, because this is, if you think about some of the great hiring organizations out there, I think about the Navy SEALs as an example. Once you reach a certain level of physical proficiency, they will actually hire for trust more than skill. And there's a reason why. And if you think about kind of football teams and what do they talk about ad nauseum, you need to do your job and trust that your teammates are doing theirs, and that's how collectively we put things together. And I'm a Notre Dame guy. My team has played Navy for 100 years, and most of the time we win, and most of the time, and occasionally we will lose. And when we lose, it is all because the players don't trust what their teammates are going to do against a very, very disciplined offense. And next thing you know, you're getting marched down the field. But when you trust your team and you have the right schematic approach to it, like we end up blowing them up, like we did a few weeks ago now. This season, we did last season as well. It is all about levels of trust, and that's why you hear Coach Holtz talking about trust. You hear Coach Freeman talking about trust. You hear these really great people leaders that happen to be in a football context that talk about trust as the most important thing. So anyway, I thank you for listening to my TED Talk on Notre Dame football.
Well, you know what though? There is something to pull out of that, because when we talk about relationship friction, it becomes harder for me to get at least my head around how are you going to measure that. But you were using a very different word in what you just said, and that's trust. And I actually think that might be the way to crack that particular code, because that's an easier one to see than, at least for me, the concept of relationship friction.
Yeah. So coming all the way back to what we have talked about so far, I think this is the inflection point for human capital leaders. And when you can start taking a power score approach, when you educate the board this way, then what you're talking about stops being a culture update. It is a risk translator. It is a performance multiplier. And once you become that, like your voice will be in every debate that includes people, which in the business world is roughly all of them. So maybe we can, shift right now as we do normally this time of the pod and talk about the playbook. So if I'm a CHRO, like what would you start doing starting Monday morning?
Well, why don't we trade ideas? Because I would say start every board prep with the CEO's investor deck. You've got to build the human capital story to mirror the capital story, not your HR calendar or the list of programs that you're trying to drive into the organization.
Yeah, and that in my history is not always easy because you're kind of all working things together at the same time. But that's why having a kind of a one-page human capital scorecard that kind of fits in right at the end of the finance overview of critical measures, which is usually somewhere either before or right after the CEO's kind of here's what we are doing and here's where we stand. Like all of those, if you can co-create it between the CEO, the CHRO, and the CFO, life is good. So what does that mean? Ad nauseum, revenue per employee, talent density, top talent retention, speed to impact, clarity of expectations. I would not add one more thing to that, and I wouldn't keep any of those off because those are as predictive a lever of impact as you possibly can go after.
I loved the conversation we were having about leadership friction. I think you've got to quantify the leadership friction, whether you're using a 360 or pulse data. I loved how you broke that out of just that word leadership friction and directed it toward trust. Irrespective, boards want to see execution risk quantified, and the better job we do of that, the more significant and relevant we become.
Yeah, Scott, what I would really focus it on is running quarterly talent reallocations. And like you have to treat talent moves like CapEx reallocation. Succession planning is yesterday's news. It focuses on how do I react to things that are happening to me. And it doesn't grow careers. It doesn't allow you to think about how do I ascend people's organizational impact. It really puts you in a position where you're playing defense. I think human capital leaders should play offense, and that offense is similar to what we do in a capex reallocation. Where can I deploy capital that will have an outsized return? That's the question that we should be doing in human capital as well, and we should be doing it all the time. Start doing that quarterly and move your best people to roles where they can be A players in the roles that matter most to the company. That's what I do.
Let me throw in one more before we transition, which, like, I think part of this conversation has really been high level board focused, but not every board is as sophisticated as every other board. And I think one thing that should be in the CHRO's playbook is, not to assume that the directors understand the people side. And so educating the board becomes an important aspect of what the CHRO should do as well. They need to give them the logic behind the system and not just the slogans. And I think if you use sort of an investor style briefing, you get there.
Yeah, I think that's right. So that would be your what do I start working on Monday? And we are unfortunately now to the point where we're going to talk about the summary. And as you guys know, Scott loves doing the summary. And he loves doing the summary because I don't know, as Scott always says, data doesn't move capital, conviction does. And most CFOs should be convicted.
I've literally never said that, but I think I might actually say that.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not talking about criminal activity on the part of CFOs. We're talking about being conviction around around talent. Okay, hit the summary. Sorry,
You want a summary?
I want the summary. Give me
All
this.
right. You
I
can't
can't,
handle
I can't
the
handle
summary.
the summary.
Right? Boards want clarity. They don't want comfort. They're big. They can handle it. They're investors in capability. They are not there to review the activity that we're engaged in day to day. The CEO's priorities define the report card, and aligning human capital programs to those priorities is really important. If you don't, if the data doesn't ladder up, then you are out of sync. As you always say, talent density and I think trust, leadership friction, they're the hidden KPIs. They predict execution speed better than an engagement score is ever going to. And if I was going to throw a fourth one in there, I would say interpretation equals influence. The CHRO who connects human capital to capital allocation becomes really indispensable to the board, to the CEO, to the business.
Yeah, I agree. So the key takeaway from today's episode to me is, as CHROs, we need to stop reporting people metrics that don't link. We cannot be human capital leaders that have a bunch of programs looking for a problem to go solve with things that we've built 5 times already. We need to start reporting how human capital multiplies business capital at a board level. And I think we've walked through a pretty good way of how to go do that. I want to pause and say thank you so much for tuning in to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is, as you know, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And it is just an absolute joy to be doing this with all of you. And we recently moved over to a different platform for our podcast, which allows us to see where everybody is. And so I want to give a quick shout out to several of our favorite listeners. Hi to everyone that's listening to us in Canada and Australia, in Germany, in the UK, in Cyprus. We're big in Cyprus. And Scott, we were talking about this in the pre-show. Almost 40% of our episode listeners are international. So if you are one of those people and there are topics you want us to cover for you that we wouldn't have kind of natively considered, let us know. Please shoot us a note on any of the platforms. We can get them and read them. And I just want to, again, say thank you for being a part of the Talent Sherpa community.
It's unbelievable to me we have an international audience, Jackson. It's also very, very humbling. If you liked the episode today, then do us a favor and hit the like button or subscribe or leave us a review on your favorite platform. That isn't just about you doing that action. Those things help spread the pod to others. So whether you're doing that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, we would really appreciate it if you just take a moment right now, take an action. Here's our challenge. We are trying to build to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We need your help to get there. It's free and it would be really helpful to us. So if you like it, hit subscribe, hit like.
And if you're a CHRO wondering, where do I start my AI journey? Because my CEO is telling me you should start your AI journey. I invite you to check out Propulsion AI at www.getpropulsion.ai. They are building a team of AI teammates that allow human capital leaders to focus on what matters most to the business. And again, a special thanks to Dripify for sponsoring the episode. You can find the link to their work in the show notes, and that is at www.try.dripify.com/Talent Sherpa.
So, Jackson, one of the things I really like about doing this pod with you is that I learn new things too, including a lot of things that I've learned from you about boards. And if y'all didn't know it, Jackson works with new and emerging CHROs to accelerate impact. So if you are tired of white knuckling it on your own, then head on over to www.mytalentsherpa.com because you're going to find a whole set of resources that Jackson has curated specifically to help you navigate, elevate, and deliver results from day one. You can even sign up for the best-selling Talent Sherpa weekly Substack, and you can do it there or at talentsherpa.substack.com.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Scott. I'm looking forward to next week where we will have a guest. I'm going to leave that. That's a tease. I'm not going to say who it is. And I just want to say again, thank you to everyone who's listening. Until next time, keep raising the bar, keep connecting capital and capability, and keep on climbing.